African Americans are lazy, woo, ghetto, loud, chronic complainers, never satisfied, and always blaming the white man for their problems. You know, the reason I can't get ahead is because the white man is trying to keep me down. Caribbean people are arrogant, entitled, coons. I dance for massa all day, yeah. Always trying to take jobs from American people. Disrespectful. And they love to kiss the white man's ass.
Yeah, the white man.
This week I'm talking about the long-standing feud between African Americans and Caribbean people. Lego. Hello kitties and welcome back to my channel. My name is Rogan and you are watching another episode of this Bahamian Gyal, your ultimate guide to the Bahamas and Washington, D.C. I know a lot of y'all are going to be tuning in this week because of last week's video. Lord, if I go viral, because I already see the animosity is in the building. Okay, so this week, I have to say, I was inspired to do this video. I had this thought for a while, but really I was inspired by someone who I speak to on Instagram. I won't call the person's name because they've asked me not to call their name. Other than that, you know, I like to give people my props, give them their props. But someone reached out to me after seeing a lot of things on social media, and I want to read what he said because this is what led into this video. So if you see me looking over to the side, it's because I'm reading his text. And it says, so I want to hear your opinion on something that I've been seeing a lot on social media. This is what the guy is saying. There seems to be this divide between those of us Black immigrants and Black Americans. Some of us from the Caribbean and Africa talk down on African Americans, and some African Americans do the same. Have you seen this? And what are your thoughts as to why this is happening? I get this question every week from African Americans, why we immigrants don't like our American counterparts. I thought that was a really good question, and it really got my juices flowing. Now, I could have sat here in my apartment and talked to you guys ad nauseum about this subject, but I was like, no, I don't want to do that this time. I want to bring in someone who I think has tremendous input, who is a critical thinker, someone who I think is incredibly fair, and I want to have that conversation with her. And this person is one of my closest and dearest friends for many, many years. She's a communications specialist. She's a former journalist. And she is just amazing on social media. She's just a really, really good person. Her name is Vanessa Clark. Vanessa has 2 bachelor's degrees. This gal is accomplished. She has a master's degree in political science. So this ain't no fly-by-night gal I rolling with. If this baby gal don't roll with no little fly-by-night peoples, okay? So Vanessa is here. I know she's laughing because she's used to this. I also have to say Vanessa is not somebody who is too comfortable. She likes being behind the scenes, okay? She's a behind the scenes woman. She ain't into this being in front of the camera. So the fact that I was able to pull her in, she must really love your girl. She loved your girl. So welcome Vanessa Clark to another episode of This Bahamian Gyal. How you doing?
I am fine. I'm good. I am kind of nervous because, like you said, I don't do in front of the camera. I'm a behind the scenes type of person. Yes.
And the thing that kills me is you have such amazing, like you have an amazing thought process. You know, I always big you up and say like, you're so smart. You're one of the smartest people I know. You're an incredible writer. By the way, she's also a blogger for the Perpetual Summer. So you guys, I'm going to link everything down below so you can go and read her stories. This girl, she deep, and don't look at her and think, oh, she meek and mild. Gangster, right? So Vanessa, thank you so much for being here with me. And I just wanted to give people a preview or a synopsis of who you are and your background. But I want to jump right into the topic as we are on Zoom, and this is a free plan, and I only got 40 minutes, less than 40 minutes. Yeah, I mean, I keep it real. So for as long as I can remember, and I mean like for as long as I can remember, there's always been this sort of bad blood, tension, animosity between Black Caribbean people and African Americans. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because like I said, when this fella slid into my DM and he asked me that question, it really got my juices flowing because I said, you know what? This is true. We do have these issues, but I don't think people really kind of talk about the genesis of this. So, I mean, you have a unique position because you also went to an historically Black college and university. So I didn't. You have greater insight into the thinking. I don't know if you ever had these conversations with African Americans, but I wanted to ask you where you think this even comes from.
Okay. This is a hard topic for
It
me,
is.
just because you're right. I went to an HBCU. I went to the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida. And so I, by right, have a lot of friends who are African American.
So don't step on no
Um,
toes.
and it's a complex issue. Let me start with a story. When I went to FAMU, one of the first classes I took was African American history. And there was a really, really controversial, but right, and I thought he was a phenomenal professor who I had, Dr. Theodore Hemingway. And there were about 75 people in this class because it was an elective course, but everybody in FAMU had to take this course.
Right.
All freshmen did. And he asked in the very first class, how many of you are not African American? 5 of us raised our hands. And he said, you 5 are going to pass this class. Everybody else is possibly going to fail.
What? Now I'm intrigued.
This is an African American man. Okay?
I'm intrigued.
And he flat out told them, and people start, like, again, it started with 75 people in the class. I want to say maybe like 15 people decided they were going to walk out at that point. And he was like, y'all African Americans, y'all don't listen. Y'all are arrogant. Y'all ain't willing to understand where you come from, why you come from there, and what you need to do in order to make it work.
Hold on one second.
Some of y'all are going to fail.
This is an African American teacher. Did he have like Caribbean roots, or did he just, as far as you know, he was just African American?
I have no idea. I never bothered to ask that question, and I probably should have.
What was the reaction from the students?
There were a lot of African Americans who were pissed off, and 15 of them walked out.
Okay.
They walked out the class.
Okay.
You know, and you would hear that a lot. You would hear, oh, African Americans are, they're arrogant, they don't listen, but they do. They do listen. And I think one of the issues is people don't take time to listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
As Caribbean people, as persons from African descent, persons who are coming from mainland Africa, you have to realize that we are a people who are coming from a Black majority standpoint.
Absolutely.
We were all born, it doesn't matter if your family was in the dumps, in the rough areas. My people from Camp Road, so you know Camp Road in the Bahamas is considered one of the roughest areas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, so you don't expect much from those people. It doesn't matter if your family is from the highfalutin people, you know, the politicians. At the end of the day, we as persons from the Caribbean or persons from mainland Africa are from places where Blacks are the majority. Mm-hmm. African Americans don't have that.
They're the minority.
They have been the minority, and they have been in a back against the wall kind of stance for a very long time.
Hold on, I want to say
that that's where you have to stay there.
You don't have to stay there. And I want to stick a pin in right there, because I think this is something that, and just so I said, and I didn't say this at the beginning, for those of you who are watching, but this is not a Bash America session. This is not a Bash Caribbean session. It's just a healthy discussion. And I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I asked some African Americans if they would be a part of this program, because I know that they have some very passionate views about Caribbean people, but they declined, and that's fine that they declined. But I did give people an opportunity to come on so that we could have a more robust conversation. But I think that's something that a lot of Caribbean people do not understand, is that we're reared in countries, because there's so many countries in the Caribbean, where our elected leaders looked like us. They look like us. Our elite class, our high class people, they look like us. They're Black. Okay. The doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, people who are multimillionaires, they're Black. We grew up seeing people who are Black. Some of Black Bahamians on the money. I'll never forget, several years ago in Atlanta, one of my friends came over to my house, and do I have my dollar bill here? Anyway, I have some Bahamian money, and showed a dollar bill, and he said, and I don't want to use the full word, He said, "Is that an N word on the money?" And I said, "What?"
Really?
Yeah. He said it was Sir Lyndon Pinling, our first
Right.
prime minister in the
Right.
post-independence Bahamas. He said, "Is that an N word on the money?" I said, "That ain't no N word on the money. That's Sir Lyndon on the money." He was like, "No, that's a black man on the money." And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "We got a lot of black people on the money." And I didn't think about it, but for him, that was a big deal. And I think a lot of Caribbean people forget that African Americans, we're all children of slavery. We're both children of slavery, but we went divergent paths. And we are now seeing billionaires emerge who are African American, people who are prominent and have position, are in a position to bring other people to the top. But that wasn't always the case. I remember my grandmother crying in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president. And I was like, "Mama, why are you crying?" Because she had seen black Bahamians and other Caribbean leaders in positions of power. And she's just like, "I never thought it would happen in my lifetime." And she was crying. And if this can happen for my grandmother, who is not even American, imagine for an African American what they must have been experiencing in that moment. So I think sometimes Caribbean people forget that their experiences are completely different. And when we say we can't understand why people feel a certain way or why they feel so marginalized, it's because they are marginalized.
You brought up a really good point about your grandmother. What persons in our age bracket need to realize is that African Americans of a generation or two prior to us and our grandparents and great grandparents, there wasn't so much of a divide, because even though we were from a country of majority Blacks, we still had white people in power way back when. What you're gonna see and what everybody needs to look for, like I've heard a lot of people saying, Black people saying, Barack Obama didn't do anything for us. He was in there for 8 years and he didn't do anything. And I have to challenge that and tell them, I need you to consider not the 8 years he was in there, but consider everybody who's born when he was in power and after, because they will have the experience that you didn't get to have, that I was born into. It doesn't matter how many white presidents there are after the fact. Barack Obama is somebody who looked like us, who had the seat of ultimate power for 8 years.
And had humble beginnings.
So every child that comes who's born after 2008, any child who's born in or who is cognizant or just becoming conscious of what the world is like around that time, they will now have this paradigm. You will see this paradigm shift in the African American community, because they now know that no matter how hard things can get, they can still actually have the potential to be the ultimate power in the world. And I think that there's a level of arrogance with Caribbean people because that's the norm for us. Looking at the African American standpoint, and I can only talk from my experience. I can't talk about African Americans in general.
Of course.
But from my experience, I actually had friends who were like, what was it like? Sitting down one-on-one. What was it like to grow up in a country where all you see was Black people? What was it like to be in that it takes a village to raise a child type of setting? Because us. Everybody raises everybody.
I often hear people talk about, in the Caribbean, there was more of a village mentality. I do believe that. I believe that even for African countries, that there is a village mentality where people are looking out for one another. But I hate that this thought process continues the people perpetuate this thought process that African Americans didn't have that village as well. I know many African Americans who tell me stories of growing up in southern US and having, like, by the time the light comes on, you got to be home before your mama says something or the neighbor is going to call. So it's not just an experience that is exclusive to the Caribbean or exclusive to Africa. African Americans have had that here too. Does it still hold today? Maybe in certain parts of the country, maybe even in the Midwest, who knows? But
in certain parts,
yeah,
but it wasn't as widespread as we have it. But then again, at the same time, we're not there. For us as much of a majority standpoint we have, we're still less than them, period,
What do you
in
mean?
terms of just sheer numbers.
Oh,
You know,
of course. That's
our
another thing.
country,
And our
our
country is
country is
small.
what, 497,000 people strong, and that's who live here and elsewhere on the planet, you
And square
know? And
miles
so,
too. It's easy when you're in a smaller town or a smaller island to keep an eye on your neighbor's kids. You know, when you
right,
get when you're in a big city or when you're in a county, I mean, shoots, Dade County is bigger population wise than the Bahamas, our entire country. And
exactly.
so to me it's easier to keep an eye on your, you know, somebody's kid when you know them, you know their name, you know the family, versus, you know, you don't know who this person is, you know, you don't have a vested interest. I want to ask, because I did a little thing in the beginning with my intro, and you, of course, aren't going to see that until after the video airs. But I want to talk about the stereotypes that each side has about the other. What are some of the stereotypes that you've heard Caribbean people say about African Americans and vice versa?
I have heard that Caribbean people are uppity.
Yes,
Caribbean,
I've heard that too, of course.
Caribbean people think they better,
Hmm.
and by extension, I've heard that Bahamians are the worst because
Oh, they say we're the
we
worst.
think we better than the regular Caribbean people, and I'm like, what do you mean the regular
Yeah,
Caribbean people? All us is Caribbean. On the other side, I've heard that African Americans are lazy.
I've heard
I've
that.
heard that they don't have a work ethic. And I have to
I,
challenge
I
people all the
disagree.
time. I'm like,
I
I went to
disagree.
FAMU. All we had recruiting
Hit
from
us.
FAMU was Fortune 500 companies. And more than 50% of those people securing those spots were African American.
Hmm.
These people are mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, biological engineers, whatever. They run the gamut, you know. And
I
so
feel you on that.
I don't see I see the same way I say Bahamian people lazy. Yeah,
Hmm.
you have that section, that group of people in every community that is lazy, that doesn't have a work ethic, that doesn't want to toe the line, you know. And if I feel like if African Americans, Caribbean people, and African people were to sit down and see the similarities as much as they see the differences,
Hmm.
we would be in a better place.
I think
Um,
not to cut you off, only because I'm very cognizant of this short period of time that we have on Zoom. But I think you're spot on. I've had the opportunity, and I'm very fortunate to have worked with African Americans in many capacities. And I've worked with lazy African Americans, but I've worked with lazy Caribbean people too. And I can
mhm.
say that for the industries that I've been in, the African Americans were like pushing, hustling, working hard. And it made me respect that. I absolutely detest when someone can look at, have an experience with one or two people, or even five or six people, and ascribe that to an entire grouping. I hate that. That's what
Yeah,
we accuse white people of doing to us every single time. Oh, you see somebody on the news and they did this. Oh, that's just black people, and it's silly. Um, I just don't.
yeah.
I don't understand it.
It's never just black people. You can't group everybody
No.
into one category. You know, I think that African Americans are very vibrant. They're very smart. They're very intelligent. There's a rich sense of history there, but there's also a sense of belonging there.
Mm.
Just because of the fact that, um, if you talk to them one on one, if you talk to them in a group, they'll say they ain't longing for Jack. You know, if you talk to them one
One
on
on
one,
one. That's where it comes
it's a whole
in.
different
Agreed.
conversation and situation.
Agreed.
And you know, I can only speak from my experience, but I went to school with some of these people for 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so after 5 years, you know, this is what I've come to, come to know of them. They are very much in tune with themselves. They're very self aware, but they're also very much interested in finding that connection that we have, that they are still aspiring to,
Are
you know.
African
And
are African Americans more aware of race than Caribbean people?
I think it's more blatant for them because of the majority minority um,
Dynamic.
dynamic. dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
There's more white people. There's growing to be there. I think there's now more Latino people
Mm-hmm.
than there are blacks. So and it's in your face all the time.
Right.
You know, I think the fact that race is there. How do I put this? Race is there in the Bahamas, but race isn't something that we talk about 24/7. I think for African Americans, it's blatant. I think for them, it's something that's in their face. Every time you turn on the TV, there's something that has to talk about race and black versus white and black versus Latino, and Latino whites versus Latino blacks. It's just something that when you're bombarded with it so much, you can't help but to think about it. When it's in your head and in your face and in your air constantly,
Mm-hmm.
it causes an issue.
We
So
don't
I wouldn't say
for
I
me.
wouldn't say Caribbean people aren't aware of race. Caribbean people just don't um broadcast it, if that's the right terminology.
I think, just being in the Bahamas, I never walked around thinking about my race at all. And why would I? I'm surrounded by people who look like me.
Yeah.
African Americans are surrounded not just with white people, but Asian people, Middle Eastern people. And so, but when you look at the news, especially when it comes to negative news, toxic news, a lot the race that is prominent when you're talking about that is the black race, African Americans. When you turn on the news and you're hearing something bad, it's very rare to hear it about an Indian in America or a South Asian,
And I and
an Asian
and I think
person,
that's
Southern
strategic. I think
Asian
that's
person.
strategic on the media's part, and I think it's also very unfair for
What
them to do
you
it.
think there's some conspiracy? You say it's strategic on the media's part. I disagree with that, because to me, if an Indian person isn't out there doing a drive-by shooting, but a black person is, I'm just reporting the news. I'm just reporting the news as a reporter. So where's the strategy behind that?
I wouldn't say, well, let me put it this way. I would say that and it's the same way that we were when we were cub reporters. There's a whole lot of news out there, but what exactly does your news director want to focus on that they think is going to get them more ratings, going to get them more people to show up and
Of
watch the
course,
news?
that's just the news business.
So
What's
there
new
there
and what's
might be an
hot.
Indian person out there shooting somebody, but if he ain't killed nobody, but he shot and maimed like 15 people, and the black person went around and shot somebody,
Nah,
which one is gonna get more airplay?
I disagree, because to me the fact that an for me, I would give it more play. Well, each would get equal play in my
Well, you know what?
estimation, because it's a murder.
I
It's a
will
murder
I
or it's
will
a
agree with you
shooting.
to an extent.
But
I will agree with you to an
the fact
extent
that an
and
Indian
say it's
person,
based on where that person shot somebody. And New York versus
I
Oklahoma.
wanna agree, but I also want to disagree. So, okay, I always have to be cognizant of the fact that people who are watching this are from different parts of the world, so they don't know a lot of the areas we're talking about. But in Nassau, if this shooting happened in Lightfoot Key, which is an upscale, gated area with uber rich people, if something like that happened there,
Child, that could get international
it'll
coverage.
get international coverage. But a lot of the
That could
details,
go.
may also be it might be
Yes,
subdued.
it'll be suppressed.
It'd be suppressed. That's the word, suppressed. But I think if you're dealing with something like homicide or whatever, it doesn't matter if it's a white person who just goes nuts and shoots up somebody, or a black person. I think they're going to get equal coverage. That's my estimation. Will it get the same treatment? That's where the difference lies. Because we've seen instances where a black person does a drive-by shooting or something. The DC snipers, of course, that was a big thing. But
Yeah.
we've also seen white young men go and shoot up a church, and they're treated differently. So it gets the coverage, but the
Yeah.
treatment to me is
Yeah.
different.
I'm pretty sure there are going to be some people who agree with us. There'll be some people who 100% disagree with what we're saying. There'll be some people who I believe in cancel culture. The only person who can cancel somebody is Jesus.
Thank you.
But
I so hate when people say that. Like, when you can't, until I die, no one can cancel me. Okay. And what am I going to lose, right? What am I going to lose at this
yeah,
point?
I'm like uh, and at the end of the day, all press is good press, I guess.
My thing is, Vanessa, as long as I can say that what I'm saying is truthful and fair, that
Yeah.
I'm balanced, I could stand on that. I could stand on that and defend that to the end of the earth, okay? And I think one of the things I've often been told by people, friends, foes, even people who don't like me, say, you know what, at least Rogan, you're fair. And I like that.
Yeah.
That's like the highest compliment you could give me, even if you don't like me, even if you call me the B word. I want to talk about the differences in the way that both sides deal with their white counterparts. Because this is something that I hear quite often. One of the stereotypes that I deal with, and a lot of Caribbean people deal with, Vanessa, I don't know if this has been your experience, is we're often accused of kissing up to the white man. We're often accused of kissing up to the white man. And I think it's because our handling or our relationships with them are completely different in some respects than the way African Americans there, because of the history that they have as well, with their white counterparts. I remember several years ago, just a quick story. I was working in a newsroom in Nassau, and one of my coworkers, who I really, really, really appreciated him because he was one of those people who's just a thinker, and he was somebody who was bold, and we would have these excellent conversations, and we were talking about relationships between like African Americans and white folks and Bahamians at that time, and white people. And he was like, Rogan, when a lot of white people come to the Bahamas, he said a lot of Black Americans think like we're kissing their butt and everything. He said, but this is a tourist-based industry, Rogan. This is a tourism-based industry. This is how we make our livelihood, right? So what will it benefit me to be nasty, negative, toxic, and have a horrible attitude with the very person who is providing the bread for me to feed my family, right? There is no, and he and I went into this conversation. I was like, I think because people, a lot of times there are some African Americans who will look at service as servitude. Like, oh, the way they're catering to these white people, the way that they treat these white people, they're fawning over them. No, the people just trying to get their money. It's no different than the way you handle your boss at work, okay? The person who signs your check, you are not going to be having an attitude if you want to keep your job.
I'll put it this way. If you are going to make me money, I'm going to treat you well. Period.
Duh.
All right. One, because 70% of this country makes their money off of the tourism industry.
Right.
And out of that 70%, 60% of them make their money from tips. So they are going to butter you up. They are going to be the nicest people possible. A lot of people have built their homes off of tips. Right. Not off of their salaries, off of their tips, and if that means I gotta talk nice to this man because this man making sure I have a house in a nice area that is well manicured and my children can go to private school. Yes, that's not. I don't see what the problem is.
Yeah,
and I don't think that Caribbean people treat. Again, it goes back to the basics. We're from a majority Black country. So when I see a white person, I'm not on pins and needles because that person white.
No.
No. To me, that's a man. That's a woman.
That is
same way I'm a man. And so I treat them the same way. Do I act? I think I act kind to everybody. So if I ask you how you feel and if you want something, why would you get offended if I ask somebody who just happens to be white how they feeling or if they want something? It's I've never understood that.
I never understood it. I hate to cut you, but I never understood it, but I do understand it. It's because you said something at the very beginning, which is you have to meet people where they are. And so if African Americans have had negative interactions with white people, And that's
Right.
been their experience for hundreds of years. If that's been their experience
Yeah.
up to 2022 and 2022, and they're still having negative, especially now in this post-Trump era, negative interactions with white people, I can't see why they would not view that person as the enemy. That's not all white people, of course, but I could understand why they would say, why is this person over here being so civil and being so kind to them? But if that hasn't been that person's reality, I don't know
Right.
if there's supposed to be some sort of almost like, you know, like when you're in high school and you say, hey, if I ain't talking to her, you ain't talking to her either. That ain't my friend. That ain't your friend either. And it's like,
That's not how the real world
that's
works.
not how the world
That's how high
works.
school works. That's how high school works. You know, that's not how the real world works. And so I was taught to respect the janitors the same way you respect the CEO. It doesn't matter what color they look like.
Mhm.
You know, what color their skin is. And that's how I was raised, and that's how it'll probably always be.
You know, one of the things that I do observe, just, you know, I haven't lived home in the Bahamas for 3 years, right? Um, but I think, more interaction with, when I say interaction, I'm not talking about seeing white people. I'm talking about having
Mhm.
conversations with white people. I had more conversations with white people back home in the Bahamas. And I think I understand a little bit why. I think when you find white Americans who come to the Bahamas, their guard is down. They're on vacation. They're in a tropical paradise. The person who is opposite them more often than not is serving them, right? Is
Mhm.
serving them. And even if you were to slip up to the bar, just as a, you know, if you and I were going out, they'll turn to you and they have the conversation because their guard is down. They're dealing with somebody whose guard isn't as up as it would be in the United States. Here, if I go to a bar, I could sit right next to a white person, probably the same white person who spoke to me when I was at, you know, at the bar in the Bahamas, and they probably wouldn't have that conversation with me. Um, I don't know if it's because, like I said, if it's because their guard is down, or they just feel like, oh, you know, this, they don't know that I'm a foreigner. They might think I'm just African American, and then there's this tension there between two people. I don't know what the reason is, but I think that I've seen a lot of white people in who come to the Bahamas just be a lot more friendly. And let's be real, they probably have more conversations with black people just by the mere fact that they're in a black country, right? Than they have back home in their own country. Some of them, when they return to the States, they don't have those interactions, those daily interactions with black people that they do when they're on a 7-day or 14-day vacation.
I have experienced that firsthand with persons flying. As simple as some white people being very apprehensive and hyper vigilant in the airport until they get to that spot, to that gate where
Mhm.
it says you're going to the Bahamas or you're going to Jamaica. All of a sudden you see this shift in them, like
It's
night and day. And
absolutely.
then they start becoming engaging
Mhm.
and asking if you're from that country and what's there to do. They're so inquisitive. They're so open to talking to anybody, and it doesn't matter what color you are.
Right.
And I've seen that happen also when they're leaving the Bahamas and
Mhm.
hopping on a plane. And as soon as they land on that US soil, that guard is back up.
But you know, you said you don't know what happens when white Americans, when they're leaving, because they're so engaging, so, you know, nurturing, so whatever, when they're on Bahamian soil. But the
Mhm.
minute they land on American soil, it's like this thing. And I thought for a second, you know, maybe their guard is up now because they know the tension between you know, whatever, or they're back to business, they're back to reality, and, you know, the vacation is over. I don't know. But also, you know, I start to think, you know, just like we were talking earlier about Bahamians um, putting on a performance, I suppose, to get tips. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? You know, you're doing what you have to do because this is your bread and butter. You do it. Maybe there's an element of performance art on their part too when they're in the Bahamas, which is, you know, look, at the end of the day, these are people who are serving me. I don't want anybody to do anything to my food or my drink, you know, or maybe I need to know where to go so, you know, the locals can guide me. But, you know, after that, yeah, I don't need you anymore. See you later. Bye. You know? So maybe there's an element of performance art on both sides.
I would agree with that to an extent. Some of them, they're definitely performing. Some of them, the entitlement is still through the roof, and you're astounded by how arrogant they can be. some of them are trying to genuinely make friends.
Do you find that African Americans use their race as a crutch? You know, a lot of times, and I was making fun of it in the intro for my video where I was saying, like, you know, the reason I can't get ahead is like, you know, the white man is keeping me down. Um, I know people have different circumstances. I mean, sometimes it just comes down to you can't afford to go to the best schools, or, you know, you were born into a family that's not so wealthy. There's so many reasons why, you know, an African American may not have made it where they want to make it in life. But I also have to talk about the fact that I do encounter a lot of African Americans. This isn't everyone, okay? But I do encounter African Americans when I'm sitting and I'm talking to them, and I'm not one of those people who's dismissive, like, if you go to a good school, you'll be okay. If you just do the right thing, you'll be okay. I think that is incredibly dismissive. But at the same time, I'm not one of those people who is just too, like, the reason for all of your problems is because some white person is trying to keep you down. And I've encountered that in numerous occasions. Not all. I have African Americans who, we don't talk about race, period, unless something happens like a George Floyd situation. We don't talk about race, period. Yeah. But I wanted to know if for you, what's been your experience with that?
I know several African American families who are thriving and striving, and they don't use race as a term to say that's a crutch at all. Mm-hmm. Now, if you get in a conversation with them on an intellectual level, talking about critical race theory and systematically why racism has hampered the African American group as a whole, they will say, yeah, okay, and this is what it is. This is why it's here, and these are the steps that the white elite took to ensure that this has remained in place for such a long period of time. You have those conversations with them, yes, they definitely will admit that is the reason why a lot of African Americans aren't where they should be or where they need to be. But to say that is what they use as a crutch, no. Not all. There are some who, yes, I have been on FAMU's campus, and there are some of them who will be like, I'm gonna get all this money or anything that I could get because the white man owes me, you know. And I'm like, I don't know what they owe you, but I mean, I know what they owe all of us, but I don't know what they owe you personally. If you don't actually, you know, you gotta, yeah, it's one thing to meet you where you're at, but in college, you are on average 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. You need to do something for yourself.
I've been asking you a lot of questions about African Americans, but you know, I also want to talk about Caribbean people too, because one of the big stereotypes, the stereotype that hurts me the most is when people say that, you know, Caribbean people are such butt kissers for white people. I hate that, because I find that to not even be the truth. That's not even the case for so many of us. If anything, we're more rebellious and more like a renegade when it comes to dealing with white folks, if I could be honest.
Yeah, I think what people see as butt kissing is us just not giving a damn about their color.
Right. White. So yeah, it's not a big deal.
You know,
you're not better than me.
I don't care. I don't care if you're white or you black.
Right.
You know, at the end of the day, if you come Camp Road, we got a problem. We can do what we gotta do. You know.
Boy, you can take the gal out of Camp Road. You can't take that Camp Road out of the gal.
But I think that also comes from us having majority black. In black and majority black countries, majority blacks in power from since we were born.
Yeah.
And so while I will respect you as a human being,
I don't worship you.
I'm not going to give you any extra credence because you are white or light skinned.
Right.
You know,
I respect you like anybody else.
Right.
And I respect you. But that's
are right. Mm-hmm. You are. And if you act stupid or you act foolish, then I like you. You know, but I can still be courteous about it. I'm not going to, you know, try to fight you or anything like that. I'm not gonna fight. I fight no one.
Right.
You know, but I think that's it. You are mistaking me. You are perceiving me kissing up to somebody you're perceiving that as me kissing up to somebody
Right.
where I'm just, you white, it's whatever.
I remember being in a Super Value, top of the hill, Mackey Street, Nassau. Shout out to Super Value. Super Values.
Yes.
Several years ago. I mean, probably 10 years ago. Who knows? I was in there with my mother. And a white American woman was in the food store as well, because that one is close to Paradise Island, that Super Value. So you would have a lot of tourists if they want to. Yeah, that's the go-to place.
That's Paradise Island's go-to Super Value.
There you go.
Food store.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I remember standing in line, and my mother was walking a little slower behind me, and so this white lady came up behind, and I had some stuff in my hand, and I motioned to my mother to come, but she was taking a bit of a time to come, not long. And I remember the lady said, "You're not gonna get in the front of me," or whatever. I said, "Ma'am, I'm standing in line. That's actually my trolley. That's my trolley is card for y'all who ain't Bahamian or British or Caribbean." I said, "That's my trolley," which it really was. I was shopping, and she was pushing it, and she said, "No, no," and she went on, and she was disrespectful. Now, there's a part of me that understands why, first of all, I don't want to stand behind someone and then be like, "Oh, shoot, here they come with this trolley full of stuff," right? But she literally walked up like seconds before my mother came, and I was just motioning to her like, "That's my stuff," And I think the lady was standing behind me with like one or two items. And I have never, Bahamians, how we go. You see somebody behind you got one or two things, we'll let you come in the front of us, especially if we get, that ain't nothing.
Yeah.
That ain't nothing.
You let them in front.
You let them in front. Come in front of me, baby, because I have a bunch of stuff. But Rogan is, I could get. So the minute you start acting a fool with me, I'm not even going to pay you no attention. I'm not even going to I ain't studying you. So I remember her, she was screaming and carrying on. And I'm not going to. Oh, because I'm standing here and you let her come in the front. I said, "That's my mother. That's my trolley. And we're going to get served." So my mother said, because my mother's from a different generation, "Ro, just let her go." I said, "No." Because you know what? Attitude is everything. And I knew she was a white American. And to me, she could have very easily said, "Oh, I didn't know that you had that trolley," or "I didn't know you had that cart." And I would have very easily said, "Ma'am, please come in the front of me because I see you only have two items." But she made the mistake of talking to me the way I think she's accustomed to talking to a lot of other folks where she's from. And that's why she still had to stand in the back of my trolley. Okay? I think a lot of times you have Americans, white Americans, not all, I also have to qualify and say not all, come into the country. And while some are very friendly and everything, there are white Americans who will come into the country and they think that they could talk to you the way they're accustomed to talking poorly to an African American or anyone else, even a white American who they feel is beneath them or whatever. And they quickly get reminded, and this is why I say one of the stereotypes that really offends me the most is when people say that we kiss up under white people, or we're like, Uncle Charlie and or Uncle Tom or whatever. I don't like that because it's so untrue. I think if anything, we're very much so like, maybe it's true because I'm from that generation. I just don't care. I don't look at you as being better than me. I respect you because she was an older lady, but the fact that she was carrying on like, what is rugga, she got a lot of heat that day.
In the words of Barris Hammond, "Don't take my kindness for weakness."
Don't take my kindness for weakness, Mom. Annie, calm down, please, miss.
we are respectful.
We are. And we're kind.
When you are in the tourism industry and that's your number one bread and butter, it is a unwritten rule. You respect where your money coming from.
Precisely.
And the fact remains is that 90% of our money comes from the North American market. That's our tourist market. That being said, we respect you. We're going to be kind to you if we work in the hotel. We'll respect you when we see you on the road. But no, disrespect is not something that is tolerated. And so I think that's where that's the issue. People aren't accustomed to being in that position. And I think we're in a unique position. Any country that has tourism as their number one industry, you would think that the people are just pandering to whites just because
they probably are afraid of whites, or they don't want whites to not like them. No, that's not the case. We have a balancing act that we play on a daily basis. You got to be respectful, but you at the same time, you still know that you are yourself a human being, and there's a certain way that everybody needs to be treated.
Absolutely.
So you treat people accordingly.
We're in the final stretch because this has been a long interview, and I know I'm going to have to condense this significantly. And I've truly been enjoying this conversation because, like I said, I'd like to get your take on things, Vanessa. You have such a unique perspective, and I tell you that in private, and I'm telling you it publicly. What do you think is the way forward for us? Or before I even get to that, before I even wrap up, I have to ask this one because this is a big one. African Americans, when I do hear criticisms about people from the Caribbean, I often hear them talk about the level of arrogance. And I know we talked about it very briefly earlier about, the fact that we're confident about a lot of things, but I do want to chime in here and say something. I'm not going to just ascribe everything to us being confident and we know who we are and we stand firm in ourselves. Let me be real with you. We got some arrogant ass Caribbean people.
Yes.
I don't think when you come into America that especially if you're coming here as a permanent resident or you're coming here as a citizen, you're paying your taxes, you're making a contribution to this country, this is now your new home, that you have to tiptoe around anyone. That's my personal belief. Just like anybody who comes into the Bahamas, for me, and pays their taxes and pays the high cost of living that it costs to live up in the Bahamas, and they're making
it's higher than over there.
It's higher, absolutely. Makes a contribution, a valuable contribution to the Bahamas. I don't feel like they should have their lips zipped and never say something in the country. I feel like they should enjoy the right to sing praises for a country and be critical of that country. That being said, I do understand the African American perspective when they see Caribbean people come over, and it almost seems like every time there's a mention of America, it's in a negative way. It's in a negative way about what America isn't doing or what African Americans aren't doing. And so the normal response is, well, if things are so better back home, why don't you just go back over there? I think it's a poor response. I understand it, but I think it's a poor response because people should be able to criticize the country or criticize certain things. But I do think we do go overboard sometimes. And I too, as a Caribbean person, will be like, well, if the U.S. is such trash, why are you here? You know what I mean? So, there is an arrogance in my estimation. What's your thought process on that?
We are hella arrogant.
I can't misconstrue that at all. What you expect? You have people who, okay, everybody wants to live the American dream, that quote unquote American dream. Even people who live where you as an American or African American vacation. Paradise has its perks. Paradise has its hang-ups. All right. I call them hashtag third world issues. And everybody's trying to get away from hashtag third world issues. That doesn't mean we're not going to complain. We are very outspoken people. It doesn't matter which Caribbean country you're from. You are a very outspoken person. You're going to speak your mind. And sometimes we all suffer from foot and mouth disease because we don't know when to shut up. But the same way I said in the beginning, you have to meet African Americans where they're at. African Americans now also have to meet Caribbean people where they're at. They come from a country where, or whatever country it is, doesn't matter if it's Jamaica, if it's Haiti, if it's the Bahamas, if it's Trinidad and Tobago, they're from a country where they say what they gotta say, and they mean what they say.
They do that back home, not just in America. They do that in their own countries.
And so that arrogance, sometimes it's not even arrogance, sometimes it's just that personality, because the same way African Americans have rich personalities, and you can tell the Southern personalities from the Northern personalities, from the Western personalities, every Caribbean country has its personality. And I think there's a personality clash that's happening more times than not. Bahamians, biggity. They have a dry accent. They tell you how they feel, and they're not going to bat an eye when they say it. Jamaicans, you might feel apprehensive, you might feel the need to run because their voice gets higher and louder as they get more passionate about what they're saying. Haitians, they will start talking to you in English, but if they go full Creole,
It's a wrap.
it's a wrap, you know? It's a quest to keep your heritage and a quest to also live the American dream. And sometimes you can't have them both. Sometimes it's not advantageous to have them both. But, you know, and it's just a matter of us having to figure out how to make it work. So if African Americans say we arrogant, yes, we are, because that's just us. But that's in a lot of cases, it's not arrogance. It's just us being us, and they don't know how we are, you know. And it takes the same way it took me 5 years to learn my African American friends and to figure out the nuances of each person, you know, because some were from the north, some were from the south, some were from California. They all act differently. They all have different personalities.
I think it's arrogance. I think that's just about personality, yes, but I think a lot of times it's arrogance too. Yeah, I gotta be so real, because I deal with some Caribbean people and I'd be like, please shut up. You know what I mean? Like, you're just doing too damn much. And I am you. You are me. We from the same spot, and you getting on my nerve. It's like family. Oh, Vanessa, thank you so much. We're like almost just a minute to go, but I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know this is like totally out of your element, and I love the fact that you actually said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to do it. Thank you so very much. And I hope this isn't the last time that we do this. I love weighing in on certain topics that, I see your eyes opening up.
Ma'am.
You know, it ain't got to be permanent, but you know, from time to time, I might say, hey girl, hop on me with one thing with me. I'm hop on this feel like a podcast almost.
You're trying to get me to be a correspondent?
I gotta cut the check. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Of course, you can follow Vanessa at
theperpetualsummer.com.
And on Instagram is the same handle?
Yeah, it's theperpetualsummer.com. Yeah.
I'm going to have everything linked down below, everyone. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I'll see you guys next week, Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for another episode. Follow me on my blog, thisBahamianGyal.com, and on Instagram and Facebook at the same handle. I love you guys, and I will see you next time. Mwah.
Yeah, the white man.